Hello, my name is Harris Bard for Pond Life Aquatics, and today, in the first of a new series called Species Spotlight, I am going to be telling you about the Siamese fighting fish. I'll be giving you a brief history about them, and then I'll be telling you about how I would create a biome for them, and then give some brief suggestions on the common mistakes that I see with Siamese fighting fish keeping. Let's get into it. Siamese fighting fish, or Betta splendens, yes, it is pronounced Betta, not Beta, as the Americans would usually say, they just pronounce it wrong, are a type of anabantoid and a member of the Gourami family. They are native to the shallow and stagnant waters of Southeast Asia, including Thailand, previously known as Siam, hence Siamese fighting fish, Cambodia and Vietnam. In their natural habitats, they can be found in places like rice paddy fields and extremely slow-moving rivers. Like a lot of anabantoids and most members of the Gourami family, they possess something called a labyrinth organ, which allows them to breathe directly from the surface of the aquarium that they are kept in, and in the wild, obviously directly from the surface of the water. Now, the history of the domestication of Betta splendens is long and extremely interesting, and although there is sometimes slightly sketchy evidence, there is indeed evidence that we have been domesticating this species for over 1,000 years, and possibly longer than that. People initially started collecting them because of their aggressive behaviours. Similarly to modern day cockfighting, people would get two members of the male species and put them together to see which one would come out on top of contests. King Rama III recognised the popularity of these contests in his populace and decided to profiteer of it by taxing these competitions. He also played a part in the distribution of bettas. Around the time of 1840, King Rama III gifted some of his fighting fish to someone called Dr. Theodore Cantor, a Danish physician and naturalist. Dr. Cantor then brought these fish to Europe and published the first ever scientific description of the species, initially identifying them as Macropodus pugnax. Some 70 years later, however, in 1909, a British ichthyologist, Charles Tate Regan, recognised the Betta as a distinct species and gave it the scientific name Betta splendens, meaning splendid fighter. Betta fish were first imported to France and Germany in the late 19th century and quickly gained popularity, eventually being exported to the United States of America in the early 20th century. Now, while Betta fighting continued in some regions, breeders increasingly began to start developing the vibrant colours, finnage and beauty of the fish that we now know today in the trade. By the mid-20th century, Bettas had become a staple in the hobby, mainly because of their beautiful finnage and appearances, alongside a really charming and fun to look at personality with relatively easy care requirements. Now, in modern times, there is obviously concerns about the breeding practices surrounding Betta fish, particularly when trying to get specific looks out of the fish. Although in recent years there has been a greater shift towards placat Bettas, which have shorter tails and therefore have greater mobility, and there is less of a concern about the overall health of the breeding systems that we have in place, there is a concern about the way that people keep their Bettas. On a recent trip to America, my girlfriend and I wanted to visit a pet mart to see how they kept their fish and the environments that they were held in. And we were shocked to see the way that Bettas were kept in cups with barcodes on them as if they were a regular dry good to be checked out. We noted how there were several dead fish left in cups, and how when we pointed this out to the shop owners, they seemingly did not care. Although in the UK we have quite strict pet shop laws to help prevent things like this being done, it is something to bear in mind when we think about keeping betta fish in particular, trying to see how they are held in pet shops and the way they are treated while they are there, as this can affect their overall lifespan. I know in our shop we give our bettas the best possible life we can, trying to give them sufficient space and filtering, and we never keep them in cups. Now, although I have said there is less of a concern about the overall breeding of bettas in terms of worrying about their physical structures in the drive to get specific variations in the breeding line, there's always a concern about the way that bettas are transported and kept overall. It's not uncommon, particularly in the wholesale trade, to regularly keep bettas in small cups and then send them on towards pet shops. And this is very unlikely to change just because of the ease of moving bettas, and it doesn't make sense to have single tanks for these wholesalers. But in terms of your pet shops, fish tend to be kept in these spaces a lot longer than you would expect. Not every fish shop will sell out of their fish every week. In fact, we end up holding a lot of our fish for weeks, sometimes months at a time, depending on how busy we are and what time of year it is. With bettas in particular, sometimes we can have them in for a week and they'll be sold, or they can be kept for 2 to 3 months. So in pet shops, it's important to look for how the fishes are being kept overall. Now, while we're on the subject of keeping bettas as best as we can, it's now time to talk about creating a biome or the best possible habitat you can for your betta fish. Now, whether or not you've kept bettas before or this is going to be your first time keeping them, there's something that I personally hold to be true about keeping bettas. I had my first fish when I was 6 years old, and I had him for 3 years. Now, I don't think in retrospect I kept that fish as best as I could. Obviously, I was 6 years old, I didn't have the knowledge that I do now, but I kept him in a relatively small aquarium with brightly coloured gravel and a neon pink coral ornament, because I just simply did not know better. And although now I'm going to talk through biomes as what I think is the pinnacle of betta keeping, any kind of naturalistic, beautifully kept, grown aquarium is going to be better than something that is entirely fake. And that's something that, if you take anything away from this video, you should definitely bear in mind. Let's talk about biomes. When we talk about creating a biome for a specific species, we want to replicate their natural habitat as closely as we possibly can, while giving them the best possible chance of having a happy and healthy life while in our care. Now, as I said earlier, bettas are found naturally in slow moving or stagnant waters in Southeast Asia. The pH in these areas ranges between usually 6.8 to 7.5 and is usually relatively soft water. In these waters, there's regularly floating plants, lots of roots, and safe spaces for bettas to live. Now, if we were to create as close to a true biome as we could, we would be wanting to have a dark substrate. Something like fluvial stratum would be perfect, or Oase Scaper Soil that I've used in scapes recently, particularly because these substrates have buffering effects on the water and will help you maintain better parameters for keeping your betta as closely to their natural environment as possible. In terms of hardscape, I would be looking at things like bogwood or spiderwood. If you wanted to be even more specific, you could pick one of the native areas for a betta, Vietnam for example, and find a type of wood, scaping wood specifically, that can be used in aquariums, and build around that. I would also potentially use some soft-edged pebbles. I would make sure that these do not leach into the water so that you don't affect your water hardness. Plant-wise, I'm not going to go into an extended list of plants you can keep from these areas of Southeast Asia because they are quite extensive. However, although I haven't got a Betta at home at the moment, some of my tanks are very close to what I would stray towards in terms of keeping a Betta biome. I would have lots of Cryptocorynes species, Rotala, rotundifolia, potentially some Java fern or microsorghum has been said to be found in these areas. I would also potentially keep something like Cabomba caroliniana to float on the surface, very similar to hornwort or Ceratophyllum demersum, and then maybe have some duckweed on the surface just to give that sense of cover and security for your Betta. In terms of tank size, I would go no smaller than 20 litres. Now personally, I would like to go much bigger for a Betta. I would like to go a minimum of 30 litres, potentially even up to a 100-litre aquarium for a single male Betta. If you're keeping females, I would go no smaller than 60 litres, although I would err on the larger aquarium size for keeping a sorority. I would even push it up to say that you shouldn't be keeping a true sorority in an aquarium less than 100 litres, as females can become aggressive towards each other. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be talking more about keeping a single male Betta, but if you want me to talk about sororities in the future, please let me know. Obviously, while keeping a Betta, you will want to have a covered aquarium. Now, I have kept Bettas in open top aquariums before, and I have just kept the water line down relatively low to the top of the tank. However, these aquariums did have hydroponically grown plants out of the top, and they also had a lot of floating plants as well, which did prevent him from jumping. For most people, I would not recommend keeping a Betta without a lid on. It is a recipe for disaster, as they are a jumping species. In terms of filtration, I would go for something relatively slow, as they do enjoy very light current or completely stagnant waters. In terms of internal filtration, I would go for something possibly like the Dennerle corner filter or an Oase heat up corner filter. In terms of hang on back filtration, I would potentially look at something like a Seachem Tidal, as they have variable speeds in terms of their flow rate. External filtration can also work well, as long as you can let them function on slow enough levels. I once kept a 40-litre aquarium with a Fluval 107 with a Siamese fighter quite easily, but that was because I had let the aquarium overgrow so much with Rotala Vietnam, which would also be an amazing choice for a biome plant, that it had clogged the end piece enough that the water was distributed in a way that my Betta was not bothered by it. Now, obviously, there's always the option of going for a unfiltered aquarium, and there's some great YouTube videos out there that show this off in an amazing way. Flew the flowerhorn, for example, was one of the first times I ever thought about growing plants hydroponically, and I very much recommend it for anyone looking to do a Betta tank in particular without any filtration or high-tech gear. I will say that keeping Bettas is extremely easy, and they can be kept in less than ideal situations because of that labyrinth organ, and they will survive. However, I think it is worthwhile, particularly in the hobby, to try and make your Betta thrive. And although in this video I've talked about creating a biome, creating anything that's just natural and vibrant, like this aquarium here, would be ideal for a Betta. Obviously, if I put a lid on it, it would be perfect
for a Betta. It's slow moving water, it's got lots of hiding spaces, lots of security, lots of natural plants, and these are the things that help a Betta thrive. Now, a quick moment towards the end of this video, I will tell you about some of the common mistakes I've seen people make while keeping Betta fish. The first one is obvious, that people think they can keep their fish in too small an aquarium. I think this comes from, again, that idea of being able to keep a Betta in a cup. It's not uncommon to see people say that they keep a Betta in a jar or a vase and that it's lived for ages and it will be happy. And it's just simply a cruel way of keeping a fish. As with any species, the smallest size recommendation for an aquarium is not the target. It is the smallest recommended size. You should always try and give any species more space than they need. Bettas will appreciate larger aquariums. Best I ever got out of one of my Bettas was it lived for 5 years in a 35-litre aquarium that was so heavily, densely planted with Rotala Vietnam, lots of soft leafed stem plant. With loads of cherry shrimp in the tank, it was almost its own contained ecosystem. He loved it and he thrived and outlived his recommended lifespan. And I think this is something that most people can do. Keeping a Betta in a blank, empty, devoid of life aquarium, which I've seen a lot of people do, is, in my opinion, simply cruel. There's a reason why when you keep a Betta in a empty, blank aquarium, they lose their colour. They become inactive, they become bored and depressed, and this depression can seemingly kill them. When you give a Betta plants and hardscape, areas for them to explore, you will see them gain colour. Another common question, not necessarily a mistake, I see from people keeping Bettas is what to feed them. Now, obviously, a high-grade pellet food is always going to be great for lots of species. However, I think people tend to forget that these fish have very varied diets in the wild, and I am of the opinion that we should try and replicate that. So personally, I would try and feed your Betta a mixture of dry food. I personally recommend using fish science. I would try and give them some frozen food as well. I'm personally a huge fan of giving my fish cyclops and garlic. For smaller species like Bettas, giving them cyclops makes it easy to feed. Mini bloodworm is always a great choice. Daphnia, brine shrimp, all live foods really are going to be fantastic for Bettas, and they'll be a joy for you to watch. Although it can seem kind of grisly sometimes putting live food into a fish tank, Bettas seemingly come alive when you give them live food. Giving them Artemia or Daphnia, you'll see them hunt in ways that you just won't observe when you give them dry food, and I think it is truly something enjoyable as a fish keeper to be able to do for your fish. Another very common mistake that I see, particularly on a lot of subreddits, is people giving fake ornamentation to their fish, which can tear a Betta's tail. Unfortunately, it can be trial and error with a lot of ornaments. Some ornaments are seemingly fine with Bettas, while some can just tear the ever-living hell out of their tail, which is horrible to have to watch. And finally, the question of what you can keep with your Betta. Now, in a biome environment, you'll want to look for other species from a Southeast Asian background. Again, I'm not going to go into an extensive list, but something that springs to mind when I think of a good tankmate when creating biomes for a Betta is a Harlequin rasbora. These are native to southern Thailand, and although I can't say for certain that they find each other in the wild, they do seemingly not bother each other when kept in aquaria. Harlequin rasbora can be kept in shoals, and therefore when you have them in with a Betta, you should have a larger aquarium. Do not get a 20-litre aquarium and fill it with rasbora alongside your Betta fish. Now, if you don't mind about biome species, then I would highly recommend keeping Corydoras with Bettas. They are extraordinarily peaceful, and personally, I think they are the best fish. They come in all different shapes and sizes and won't bother your Betta at all, and your Betta probably won't bother them. Another thing that springs to mind is neon tetras. However, I would say you should be keeping your neons in larger shoals. They will be less stressed and less prone to nipping. Some people have never had issues with neon tetras nipping. Some people say that they nip all the time. Personally, I am of the opinion that if you keep neons in a small enough aquarium with a Betta fish, you're more likely to have nipping. Now, obviously, keeping shrimp is another great example of what you can keep with your Betta. Yes, your Betta will hunt smaller shrimp, but if you set up an aquarium like this with lots of hide spaces for your shrimp, and you let them colonize before you add a Betta in, you should end up with somewhat of a balanced ecosystem. I had over 200 Taiwanese bee shrimp in this aquarium, and it was incredible. And they lived happily alongside a Betta fish. There was just so much plant and so many hide spaces that it created this natural ecosystem for them. And as I have gone on about in this video, I think that is the best possible way to keep your Betta fish. Now, I'm sure I've missed out on something relatively crucial when it comes to keeping Bettas. So if I have, feel free to ask anything in the comments below. I'm always responding to people who drop me a comment, and I really appreciate it. Even if you don't have a question, please drop a comment below. Let me know if you liked this video, if you want me to do more species spotlights, if there's anything you would like me to speak about specifically in more species spotlights. Once again, I would like to say thank you for all the support that this channel is getting. Thank you to all the new subscribers. It's fantastic that people are responding and enjoying the content that I'm putting out. For today, that is all, and I will see you again next time for this pond.